So let us move to the third speaker of this panel, to Dr. Joanna Sliwa. Dr. Joanna Sliwa is a historian at the Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany, the Claims Conference. She also administers two academic programs at the Claims Conference, the Saul Kagan Fellowship in Advanced Shoah Studies and the University Partnership in Holocaust Studies. Dr. Sliwa's own research focuses on the Holocaust in Poland and on Polish Jewish history. Her book, Jewish Childhood in Krakow, a micro-history of the Holocaust, received a 2020 Ernst Frankel Prize for the Wiener Holocaust Library. Dr. Sliwa has worked as a university lecturer and as a consultant for academic texts, websites, films, TV programs, and exhibits. Her talk will be on compensation programs for Jewish child Holocaust survivors. Please.
Okay, so now you saw the entire presentation right? Okay, but I will still do my, about 15 minutes. All right, so everyone can hear me because I can hear myself? Yes? Okay, great, wonderful. All right, so there are only two presentations that separate us from dinner, right, Gustavo? Yes, so we will be concise so everyone can get to the rest of their evenings. All right, so in the previous session, Ambassador Colette Avital spoke about, mentioned in the concluding remarks about compensation for child survivors of the Holocaust. And this is precisely what I will be talking about. So thank you, Ambassador Avital, for that kind of entry and introduction. But before we get into the topic, I will begin with a question. What experiences did Jewish child survivors have with Holocaust compensation? This was a central question in a 1998 survey of over 600 child survivors worldwide. The researchers were Robert Krell, a psychiatrist who himself is a child survivor from the Netherlands, and Sarah Moskowitz, a therapist who had been working with child survivors since the 1980s. And here you just have some more information about the article that I'm talking about and where it derives from in case you are interested. Now, what did the findings reveal? The findings confirmed that the effects of Holocaust persecution on nearly every aspect of a child survivor's life. What is more, the data conveyed the urgency to provide restitution to child survivors. The study found that as of 1998, 54% of the respondents received no restitution or minimal restitution. Of course, some child survivors have been receiving pensions or received one-time payments from the program negotiated as part of the Luxembourg Agreements in 1952, and we've heard presentations mentioning this, so I will not go into that. Other child survivors received payments and pensions from compensation programs that are administered by the Claims Conference. Negotiations between the Claims Conference and the German Finance Ministry led to many expansions in the eligibility criteria over the years. So the number of child survivors who qualified for compensation increased. By 2002, so only a year after Krell and Moskowitz's study was published, claimants who were born between 1927 and 1944 comprised around 40% of all approvals for the hardship fund and for the Article 2 fund, respectively. So you can see that nearly half of the claimants who were approved for the Article 2 fund and hardship fund payments were children, were young people during the Holocaust. Oops, okay. In this presentation, I will focus on two compensation programs the Claims Conference negotiated to recognize the suffering of Jewish survivors who were children during the Holocaust. And these two compensation programs are the Child Survivor Fund that was negotiated in 2014 and the Kindertransport Fund that was negotiated in 2018. Each program provides one-time payments of 2,500 euros. Those are, again, one-time payments. The main questions that I will examine, because of the time, so I will examine two questions, were one, who were the child survivors that received the one-time payments from the two funds? And the second question, what is the broader meaning of these compensation claims? And again, I will not go into a lot of detail, but kind of sketch broad strokes. This research derives, it's an ongoing research project. It derives from a larger project that my colleague, Dr. Aviv and I have been working on. As you will see, my presentation is grounded in numbers. And those numbers are to provide insights into the thousands of individual approved claims. But let's remember that each claim represents a person. It's of a person. It reflects an individual history of persecution and of coming to terms with the aftermath of the Holocaust. One child survivor to whom I will refer by her first initial for privacy, because of privacy, R, concluded her application to the Claims Conference with the following words, and I quote, "I have no means of support. I have no family because they were all killed in the gas chambers of Auschwitz, and I suffered terrible anxiety." This short sentence encapsulates the enduring consequences of the Holocaust on child survivors. The effects of wartime uprooting, loss of family, persecution during one's formative years, and damage to health became more pronounced as child survivors advanced in age. R was the daughter of Jews who fled from Nazi Germany to Shanghai. She endured confinement in the ghetto in Japanese-controlled Shanghai. Now, R was eligible. I hate to refer to a person by the first initial, but I have to because of privacy. She was eligible to apply for compensation already in the 1990s, but she waited until 2015. At that time, she lived in the United States, and her financial need pushed her to both formally come forward as a child Holocaust survivor and to seek compensation. Now, R was among the first claimants to receive a payment from the Child Survivor Fund. The data that is derived from compensation claims, such as this one of this claimant, convey information about the trajectories of child survivors, about their needs, about their situation as they advanced in age, and also about their motivations to seek compensation. By 2020, the Child Survivor Fund was open to Jewish Holocaust victims who were born in 1928 or later, and who suffered at least one of the following types of persecution: concentration camp, confinement in a ghetto, hiding, life under false identity, or if they had been a fetus, during the time that their mother suffered one of those types of persecution. Nearly 85,600 claimants were approved for the Child Survivor Fund between 2015, when the first payments were dispersed, until 2020, the ending year for this research. The selected research results that I will present are based on a little over 83,000 claims that have been sufficiently indexed in the database. In the first 5 years of fund's existence, around 57% of the approved claimants were women, and about 42% were men. Now, what does this tell us? Of course, the data is incomplete, right? There's still more to study. But this gender breakdown already begins to reflect the general scholarly finding to date that more girls than boys survived the Holocaust. Most of the approved claimants were born between 1928 and 1941. Over 4,000 people in each of those years. The oldest children, of course, remembered what they went through, or remembered many details of what they went through. Some younger children recalled flashbacks of their traumatic experiences. Other children did not have memories of their own. And yet, that experience of persecution remained with them for the rest of their lives. What else do these numbers tell us in terms of the birth ranges, right? The birth dates. So clearly children continue to be born in ghettos, in camps, and while the parents were in hiding. And this in turn can convey many different things. But to me, my area of study is mainly social history of the Holocaust, daily life, Jewish daily life during the Holocaust, Jewish responses to persecution. So for me, this conveys the hope that Jews had for a future that they saw in children. The largest number of claimants who were approved for the Child Survivor Fund were born in and persecuted in Romania, followed by Hungary and France. Now, what do these numbers tell us? They tell us that how geography, timing, authority, persecution measures, and modes of survival influence the fates of Jewish children. Another considerable number of claimants listed Poland as their country of birth and as a country of persecution. To put that number into perspective, in 1939, out of 3.3 million Jews, about 3.3 million Jews in Poland, there were about 1 million children under the age of 14. So the small number of child survivors from pre-war Poland that we already see for these first 5 years of the fund's existence show the extent to which Jewish communities were robbed of their future, the children. A child survivor may have experienced several types of persecution, but one type is assigned for the purposes of approval of a person's application. So as you can see here, large numbers of child survivors were approved because they were confined in a ghetto. They lived in hiding. And this in turn reveals how children experienced the Holocaust, how and where they experienced the Holocaust. Children were also interned in open ghettos, a large number of children, relatively large number here. And this latter point reflects the claims conference's ongoing successful negotiations between 2014 and 2020 to recognize several open ghettos in Romania and in Bulgaria as a type of persecution, persecution eligible for compensation. The data about claimants approved to receive payments from the Child Survivor Fund also shows some information about places where child survivors lived. The largest numbers of those who were approved between 2015 and 2020, and I keep stressing the dates because, again, the data is not complete, lived in Israel, the United States, not surprisingly, and in France. But aside from these major centers of post-war Jewish life, child survivors continued to live in the countries where they were born and where they were persecuted. So more broadly, this information reveals not only where assistance for Holocaust survivors is essential, but also where Jewish life underwent a revival and where it requires support in order to thrive. We can talk more about the Child Survivor Fund. I will just say that, of course, the establishment of the fund was a major achievement of the Claims Conference to secure a measure of justice for the youngest Holocaust survivors. In 2019, the Claims Conference opened a new program, the Kindertransport Fund, to recognize the suffering of survivors, young survivors, who fled on children's transports for the fear of persecution in their home countries. So by 2020, the Kindertransport Fund was open to Jewish Nazi victims if they were under 21 years of age, were unaccompanied by their parents when they fled on a transport that was not organized by the German government. Another eligibility criteria is that the child must have been transported from anywhere within the German Reich or from territories that were annexed or occupied at the time. And the third major criteria is that the transport had to take place between a specific time frames. So of course, since the creation in 2019 and since 2020, the Claims Conference negotiated for the expansion of the Kindertransport Fund's eligibility criteria. Over 1,300 survivors were approved for the one-time payment from the Kindertransport Fund between 2019, when the first payments were issued, and 2020, the ending year for this research. So again, it's just 1 year. The largest number, over 1,200, were approved in 2019, so when the compensation program began. Now, this points to the urgency of the program and its significance for the child survivors who had been waiting for this acknowledgement for many years. The number of child survivors who were approved in just that 1 year surpassed the initial estimated number of claimants who were deemed eligible for the fund. What I discussed here is only a glimpse into the data collected for the claims that were approved by the Child Survivor Fund and by the Kindertransport Fund. I made some remarks during the presentation, but now I would like to turn to some other ones about the broader meaning of the claims submitted to and approved by the two funds. So of course, the data refers to a limited time frame of each of the two programs. It represents a limited number of child survivors whose persecution histories meet the eligibility criteria. And the numbers that I highlighted concern the child survivors who chose to apply to the Claims Conference. They relate to child survivors who were aware of their Jewish origin and were aware of their experiences during the Holocaust. But still, the data, as incomplete as it is here that I'm presenting, conveys information about the thousands of survivors who were infants, children, and teenagers during and immediately after the Holocaust. Now, not all applicants were immediately eligible for a payment because of the place, duration, or type of their persecution. At first, eligible claimant survivors were contacted by the Claims Conference based on the claims that they had submitted previously. But survivors also applied. They thought they were eligible and applied to either of the two compensation funds. So in this way, child survivors were claiming their identities as Holocaust survivors and as child Holocaust survivors. The personal narratives and the archival records that are contained in each file validate the voices and memories of Jews who were children during the Holocaust. The claims that child survivors submitted to the two funds provide insights into the multi-layered experiences of young people during the Holocaust. A child survivor to whom I will refer again by the first initial E was 8 years old in 1939 when the Slovak authorities evicted her family from their home in Bratislava. In February 1944, E and her brother were smuggled to Hungary as a rescue measure. However, as we all know, by March 1944, Germany occupied Hungary. So what that meant was that the children had to go back to Bratislava, which was considered safer for them. But when the deportations of Slovak Jews resumed in summer 1944, E and her two siblings went into hiding. At first, they received help from some non-Jews. But when the money dried up for their protection, the children had to leave their refuge, the shelter. So they tried to survive on their own using false identities. E's story demonstrates the combination of survival strategies that Jewish children employed, such as, in her case, flight, hiding, life under a false identity. Another story that I would like to share with you is the story of Elle, who was about 10 years old when her parents placed her and her sister on a children's transport from Germany in December 1938. The sisters arrived in the Netherlands with the help of a Dutch Jewish organization. But upon arrival, they were separated. In May 1940, Elle fled on her second kinder transport, this time to England. So claims such as this one bring to light histories, including information about Jewish resistance and resilience that would otherwise remain unknown. The claims submitted to the Kindertransport Fund also underscored the complexities of what children's transports were and when, where, and how they took place. It took over 60 years after the momentous Luxembourg agreements to acknowledge the trauma and hardship that Jewish children endured during and after the Holocaust. The negotiations for the existence of both the Child Survivor Fund and the Kindertransport Fund reflect the institutional history of the Claims Conference. The two funds show how central child survivors have been for the organization. The funds have enabled thousands of Jewish survivors who were children during the Holocaust to obtain some measure of justice. Thousands of child survivors came forward and shared their histories, thereby expanding our understanding of the Holocaust. In the first session today, Lorena De Vida called for integrating the history of the Luxembourg agreements into the study of international relations, which she saw was missing in it, right? So I would like to follow up on that call and urge for the integration of the history of compensation into the study of child survivors of the Holocaust. There are many studies of child Holocaust survivors, how they live, their traumatic experiences, but we still don't have enough about compensation and what did that mean for these Jewish survivors who were very young, children, teenagers, infants, when the Holocaust ended. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see that commonality already of the three presentation is that we are moving from a history of compensation to using reparation as an archive for historians to study the history, and it's two different things, and it's very interesting the types of histories that are being done on the basis of the archive of the reparation.